The chamber was built to make decisions feel heavier than they already were. Not by size alone, though it was vast enough to swallow sound and return it softened, but by design, curved walls of pale metal, veins of dim blue light running through them like something alive, watching. Even the air seemed measured, filtered through invisible systems that removed not just impurities, but anything resembling comfort. It was the kind of place where words became final the moment they were spoken. At the center of it stood a human who looked, by all observable standards, entirely unimpressed. He shifted his weight from one foot to the other, not out of nervousness, but out of boredom, as if he had been waiting in line for something far less consequential than a death sentence. His hands were held apart by a restraint field that hummed faintly, a soft, persistent vibration that tingled up his arms. He had tested it earlier, briefly, just to confirm what he already suspected, that it would be very unwise to try anything clever. "Comfortable?" one of the Vithari guards asked, the translator implant rendering the word with polite precision. The man glanced down at the invisible force binding his wrists and rolled one shoulder. "I've had worse," he said. "Once got stuck in a cargo lift for 6 hours with a malfunctioning temperature regulator. Froze on one side, roasted on the other. This is balanced." The guard stared at him for a moment, clearly uncertain whether that had been a complaint, a joke, or a confession of questionable life choices. Eventually, the guard decided none of those required a response and returned to stillness. Around them, the chamber filled slowly with officials, their robes layered in subtle variations that indicated rank, history, and in at least one case, a fondness for unnecessarily dramatic shoulder pieces. They spoke in low tones, their voices blending into a quiet, controlled murmur. Occasionally, one of them would glance toward the human, as if expecting him to suddenly reveal himself as something more dangerous than he appeared. He did not oblige them. Instead, he tilted his head slightly, studying the architecture like a tourist who had wandered into the wrong exhibit, but decided to stay anyway. "Nice place," he muttered, mostly to himself. "Very curved." The doors at the far end of the chamber opened without sound. Silence followed them in. It was not the natural quiet of a room waiting for something to happen, but the deliberate kind, the kind that moved through the gathered officials like a command. Every conversation ceased mid-word. Every movement stilled. Even the faint hum of the restraint field seemed to fade into the background. She entered without haste. Queen Sira did not need to hurry. The space adjusted around her, or perhaps it only felt that way. Her presence carried a weight that was not physical but undeniable, something shaped by years of command, of decisions made without hesitation and carried without regret. Her long ears, elegant and unmistakably Vithari, angled slightly back as she walked, her gaze already fixed on the center of the chamber. On him. The human straightened a little, not out of respect exactly, but out of recognition that something important had just entered the room. He squinted slightly as if trying to see her more clearly through the distance, then gave a small nod to himself. "Okay," he murmured. "Definitely upgraded security." She took her place at the elevated bench, the surface before her illuminating softly as data streamed into view. Reports, recordings, the precise and unembellished account of what the human had done to earn his place there. Trespass into restricted Vithari space, evasion of interception protocols, disabling of 2 escort vessels with methods that were, according to one report, unnecessarily creative. Refusal to comply with questioning upon capture. She read it all in silence. The chamber waited. Finally, she lifted her gaze from the display and looked directly at him. It was not a casual glance. It was the kind of attention that felt like being measured and understood in the same moment. "State your purpose," she said. The translator carried her voice across the chamber, but it did not diminish it. If anything, it sharpened it. The human considered the question for a moment, his brow furrowing slightly, as if he were deciding how honest he could afford to be. "That depends," he said at last. "Are we going with the official answer, or the one that actually makes sense?" A ripple of unease moved through the officials. One of them shifted, clearly preparing to object, but Sira raised a single hand, and the movement died before it could become sound. Her gaze did not leave the human. Begin with the official answer, she said. He nodded as if that were entirely reasonable. Officially, he said, I made a navigation error, panicked, and accidentally disabled two of your ships while trying to correct it. There was a pause, then, from somewhere in the chamber, a quiet, disbelieving breath. Siraj's expression did not change. And the answer that makes sense? He exhaled slowly, his eyes meeting hers without hesitation. I was looking for someone, he said. The words settled into the chamber, heavier than they should have been. Sira regarded him in silence, something in her posture shifting, just slightly, almost imperceptibly. Explain, she said. He smiled then, but it was not the careless expression he had worn before. There was something else behind it now, something older, something that did not belong to the man standing in the center of a Vithari trial chamber. I would, he said, but I get the feeling I'm running out of time. The chamber did not move, but the atmosphere did. It shifted in small, almost invisible ways, the kind that only those used to tension could feel. The human's words lingered longer than they should have, as if the room itself was deciding whether to accept them as truth or discard them as defiance. Sira did neither. She gestured once, and the display before her expanded, pulling up a sequence of recorded events. Light unfolded into motion. The chamber dimmed slightly as the projection took shape in the air between them. A ship appeared, compact, human-built, clearly modified beyond regulation. Its hull bore the scars of long travel, patched and repatched with materials that did not always match. It moved through Vithari space not like a trespasser trying to hide, but like someone who had decided that subtlety was a waste of time. You entered a restricted zone without clearance, Sira said, her voice calm, precise. You were intercepted. The projection responded. Two Vithari escort vessels slid into frame, sleek and impossibly smooth, their movements synchronized like a single thought split into two bodies. They issued a warning, visible in the flicker of coded signals, then adjusted position to guide the human ship away. The human crossed his arms as best he could within the restraint field and watched his past decisions unfold with mild interest. I remember this part, he said. That was when I thought, this could still go well. A few of the officials turned their heads slightly, not quite looking at him, but very much aware of him. The projection continued. The human ship did not turn. Instead, it accelerated, just slightly, just enough to be annoying. The escort vessels adjusted again, more firmly this time, their formation tightening. A second warning, stronger. Then the human ship did something that caused several Vithari officers in the chamber to stiffen even now. It rotated, not to flee, not to attack, just enough to align itself at an angle that made no tactical sense. What is he doing? One of the officers muttered under his breath, forgetting, briefly, that the event had already happened. The answer came immediately. A pulse, brief, controlled, almost elegant, flashed from the human ship. It did not strike either escort vessel directly. Instead, it passed between them, splitting at the last possible moment into two smaller waves that curved, impossibly, around their shields. Both ships flickered, then went still, not destroyed, not even visibly damaged. Just paused, as if someone had politely asked them to stop functioning for a moment. The projection froze. Silence followed. The human tilted his head, examining the paused image. In my defense, and he said, I really did aim for something less dramatic. It just worked better than expected. Sira did not look away from the projection. You disabled two military vessels, she said. Temporarily, he corrected. Very temporarily. I checked. You checked. Of course I checked. I'm not reckless. A faint, almost dangerous stillness settled over the chamber at that. One of the senior officials leaned slightly toward another and whispered, not quietly enough, He is absolutely reckless. I heard that, the human said, glancing in their direction, and I'd like to point out that if I were reckless, I would have brought something bigger. Sira lifted her hand again, and the projection resumed. The human ship continued forward, passing between the drifting escort vessels as if nothing unusual had occurred. No evasive maneuvers, no attempt to conceal its path, just a steady, deliberate course deeper into restricted space. You made no attempt to flee, Sira said. No, he agreed. You made no attempt to hide. No. You did not respond to any further communications. He hesitated just slightly. I was busy. A pause. With what? She asked. He considered that for a moment, as if weighing how much to reveal. Getting closer, he said finally. The projection shifted again, now showing the final phase of the approach. Defensive systems activating, patrol routes adjusting, the entire sector responding to a single, persistent anomaly that refused to behave like an enemy and refused to behave like anything else. You were aware, Sira said, that your actions would be interpreted as hostile. Yes. And you continued anyway. Yes. The chamber seemed to tighten around that answer. Sira turned her gaze from the projection back to him. There was no anger in her expression, no visible judgment, only a focus that felt sharper now, more intent. You have offered no justification for your actions beyond a vague statement, she said. You claim you were searching for someone. I was. In Vithari restricted space. Yes. With no authorization, no communication, and no explanation. That about covers it. A long measured silence followed. Then quietly Sira said, You understand the consequence of such actions? The human nodded. Very well, he said. This is the part where things usually go poorly. One of the guards shifted, clearly uncomfortable with how casually he was discussing his own fate. Sira studied him for another moment, as if searching for something beneath the surface of his answers. Then explain, she said. This time the word carried more weight. Not a command, a demand for truth. The human exhaled slowly, his gaze steady on hers. I told you, he said. I was looking for someone. Sira did not blink. Then give me a name. For the first time since the trial began, the human hesitated. It was brief, but it was real. He looked at her, not past her, not around her, but directly at her, and something in his expression shifted, something that did not belong in a trial chamber. I was hoping, he said quietly, I wouldn't have to. The silence that followed did not feel empty. It felt like something waiting. Sira remained still, her gaze fixed on him, unblinking and precise. Around her the chamber held its breath in that peculiar, disciplined way of people who had long ago learned that speaking at the wrong moment could be more dangerous than any weapon. You were hoping, she repeated, her voice even, to enter restricted Vithari space, disable military escorts, refuse all communication, and avoid giving a name. The human gave a small, almost apologetic shrug. When you say it like that, it sounds less reasonable. A faint shift moved through the officials. Not laughter, not quite, but something dangerously close to it. Sira did not react. And yet, she said, you proceeded. Yes. Knowing the consequence. Yes. Without certainty of success. He tilted his head slightly. I had a feeling. A feeling. Not a great plan, I'll admit, he added. But I've tried better plans. They tend to fall apart faster. One of the officers near the back muttered something about humans and their catastrophic confidence, earning a brief glance from a superior that suggested silence would be appreciated. Sira leaned back slightly in her seat, not relaxing, but recalibrating. The display before her shifted again, now focusing on the captured data from the human ship. Layers of encrypted logs unfolded, each one partially reconstructed by Vithari systems. Your vessel, she said, contained extensive navigational records. Yeah, I've been told I don't clean those up very well. They indicate repeated course corrections over a period of several cycles. That sounds about right. Adjustments based on fragmented data, intercepted signals, and... She paused briefly as the translation processed the term. Unverified civilian transmissions. He nodded. That's the polite way of saying I was following rumors. Rumors, Sira repeated. Some of them were very confident rumors, he added. One of them came with a map drawn in what I'm pretty sure was soup. A faint, unmistakable flicker touched Sira's expression before it vanished again. You trusted this information, she said. I didn't trust it, he corrected. I just didn't have anything better. The chamber absorbed that answer, uncertain what to do with it. Sira's gaze sharpened slightly. And all of this, she said, gesturing to the layered data, was in pursuit of a single individual. Yes, you crossed systems, evaded patrols, and risked termination. Repeatedly, he added, for someone you cannot yet name. He hesitated again, but this time it was different. Not reluctance, exactly. More like the careful handling of something that had been carried for too long. I can name her, he said quietly. I just don't know if it's still her name. That landed differently. Sierra's fingers rested lightly against the surface of the bench, but there was tension there now, subtle but present. Explain, she said. He exhaled slowly, glancing down for a moment before looking back up at her. 20 years is a long time, he said. People change. Titles change. Names. Sometimes they don't stay where you left them. You expect this court, Sierra said, to consider a defense based on uncertainty. I'm not asking for a defense, he replied. I'm just trying to answer your question without being wrong. A pause. Then from somewhere near the front, a voice spoke. Measured, cautious. Your Majesty, one of the senior advisors said, the subject continues to avoid direct identification. This is consistent with deliberate obstruction. The human turned his head slightly. I'm not obstructing, he said. I'm being careful. Careful, the advisor repeated. Yes, there's a difference. From our perspective, the advisor said, there is not. The human considered that, then gave a small nod. Fair. Sierra raised her hand slightly and the exchange ended before it could grow into something less controlled. Her attention returned fully to him. You will provide a name, she said. This time there was no room left in the request. He understood that. He drew in a breath, holding it for a moment, as if aligning something inside himself. All right, he said. The chamber seemed to lean closer. He looked at her, not at the crown, not at the position, but at her. When I knew her, he said slowly, she wasn't a queen. No one moved. She didn't have guards or ships or people waiting for her to make decisions that would affect entire systems. His voice was steady, but there was something beneath it now, something that did not belong to the present moment. She had a habit of getting into arguments she couldn't win and then winning them anyway. A faint ripple passed through the chamber, confusion mixing with something harder to define. She used a different name, he continued, not the one you use now. Sierra did not interrupt. He took another breath. Her name was... The doors opened. Not with force, not with urgency, but with the precise, controlled motion of someone who knew exactly how much interruption they were allowed. An aide stepped forward, carrying a small sealed data unit. The timing was exact, too exact. The aide approached the bench and bowed slightly, extending the unit towards Sierra. Recovered from the subject's equipment, they said. Personal identification data, recently decrypted. The human closed his mouth. For the first time since the trial began, he looked genuinely uncertain. Sierra accepted the unit without taking her eyes off him. The surface of the bench responded immediately, unfolding the contents into light. A name appeared. An image followed. Older, yes. Changed. But not enough to erase what had been. The chamber did not understand what it was seeing, but Sierra did. Her hand, which had begun to rise, perhaps to continue, perhaps to decide, stopped. Just for a moment. Just long enough for 20 years to collapse into a single, impossible recognition. The name did not echo. It did not need to. It simply existed there, suspended in light, undeniable. Sierra did not move. That more than anything unsettled the chamber. Her stillness was not the composed stillness of authority. It was something else, something far more dangerous, because it did not belong to the present moment at all. The officials watched her carefully, each one aware that something had shifted, but none of them yet understanding what. The human saw it immediately. He let out a breath, quiet but unmistakably relieved. Well, he said under his breath, that saves me the trouble of saying it wrong. No one responded to that. Sierra's eyes remained on the projection, on the image that had just been reconstructed from decades-old data. The quality was imperfect, the edges softened by time and translation between incompatible systems. But the core of it, the expression, the posture, the unmistakable shape of a younger self, was intact. A name she had not heard spoken aloud in years. Not here. Not like this. The bench beneath her fingers dimmed slightly as the system waited for input. It received none. "Your Majesty," one of the senior officials said carefully, "shall we proceed?" She did not answer. Instead, she looked at him. Not as a subject, not as a defendant, as a question. The human met her gaze, and for the first time since the trial began, the ease in his expression faltered. Not completely, not enough to break him, but enough to reveal that whatever he had been carrying to reach this moment was heavier than he had let on. "Took you a second," he said, softer now. A few of the guards shifted at the familiarity in his tone, but Sira raised a hand without looking away, and the movement stopped. "You," she said. It was not a question. He gave a small nod. "Yeah." Another pause. "You are older," she said. He blinked once, then let out a short breath that might have been a laugh. "That tends to happen," he replied. "I tried to avoid it, but the universe insisted." There it was again, that strange, misplaced humor, threading through something that should have been far more severe. And yet, for a brief moment, something almost unrecognizable passed through Sira's expression. Not softness, but memory. "You should not be here," she said. "I figured that part out when your ship started shooting at me," he said. "In my defense, I did try to knock first. You disabled 2 of my escort vessels." "Temporarily," he corrected again, out of habit more than defiance. "They'll be fine. Probably annoyed, but fine." A faint ripple moved through the chamber again, this time edged with something sharper, uncertainty, perhaps even disbelief. Sira descended from the bench. That was not part of the process. Several officials exchanged quick, silent looks, but none of them spoke. They knew better than to interrupt a deviation they did not yet understand. She stopped a few steps away from him, close enough now that the differences were clearer. Time had changed him. There were lines where there had been none, weight where there had once been lightness. But beneath it, unmistakably, he was the same, and he was looking at her as if she had not changed at all. "That is not my name anymore," she said. He nodded once. "I guessed. And yet you came here using it." "I didn't know what else to use," he said. "Didn't think Her Majesty of a very complicated title I can't pronounce would get me very far." One of the officers coughed suddenly, disguising what might have been the beginning of a laugh. Sira ignored it. "You crossed into restricted space," she said. "You forced an engagement with my fleet. You refused to identify yourself." "I didn't think you'd recognize me from a transmission," he said, "and I didn't exactly have time to schedule an appointment." "You could have died." "Yeah," he agreed. "That part wasn't ideal." A pause. "But you came anyway," she said. He looked at her then, properly, without deflection, without humor to soften it. "I told you I would," he said. The words landed quietly, but they landed. Something in Sira's posture shifted again, subtle but real. The chamber, already strained, seemed to tighten further around that exchange. One of the advisors stepped forward, unable to remain silent any longer. "Your Majesty," they said, careful but firm, "this individual has committed multiple violations of Vathari law. Regardless of prior association, the protocol is clear." Sira did not look at them. "I am aware of the protocol," she said. "Then, remove the restraints." The words cut through the chamber like a clean break in metal. For a moment, no one moved. The guard nearest the human hesitated, clearly unsure whether he had heard correctly. "Your Majesty? Remove them," she repeated. The hesitation lasted exactly 1 second longer than it should have. Then the guard stepped forward and deactivated the field. The hum vanished. The human flexed his hands slowly, as if reacquainting himself with something simple and long denied. "I have to say," he murmured, "that's already a better outcome than I planned for." No one laughed, but the tension changed. It was no longer the tension of a trial nearing its conclusion. It was something far more unpredictable. Sira studied him for another moment, then said, "You will explain everything." He nodded. "That was always the plan." "And you will do so," she added, her voice steady again, returning to something closer to command, "without damaging any additional military assets." He raised his hand slightly as if in surrender. "No promises," he said, then paused, catching himself. I mean, reasonable promises. For the first time, unmistakably, Sira almost smiled. And that, more than anything else, unsettled the entire chamber. The restraint field vanished, but the weight in the chamber did not. If anything, it grew heavier. The human rubbed his wrists slowly, as if testing reality rather than circulation. He glanced around, taking in the guards, the officials, the very uncomfortable collection of people who had just witnessed a death sentence turn into something else entirely. Well, he said, this is new. No one replied. Sira stood a short distance from him, her posture composed again, but no longer distant. There was a closeness to her focus now, as if she had stepped out of her role just enough to see him clearly, and was now deciding how to step back into it without losing that clarity. You will begin from the start, she said. He nodded once. That part might take a while. You will be concise. He considered that. I can try to be selectively concise. A faint sound came from one of the officials, something between a sigh and a suppressed reaction to a statement that had not answered anything. Sira did not look away from him. Begin. He exhaled slowly, shifting his weight again, but this time it wasn't boredom. It was alignment, pulling thoughts into order. I lost you, he said. The simplicity of it cut through the chamber more effectively than any formal explanation could have. Sira did not move. The settlement, he continued, wasn't supposed to be temporary. That's what they told us. Stability zone, they called it. Neutral ground, which as it turns out is just a polite way of saying, we're hoping no one fights here today. A few of the officials exchanged quiet glances, the translation of his tone carrying more than just the words. We got used to it, he said. People do that. You start believing that if something hasn't gone wrong yet, maybe it won't. And then it did, Sira said. He gave a small nod. Yeah, it did. The chamber remained still, but the projections behind Sira shifted slightly, as if responding to the narrative. Pulling up archived conflict data from that region, timelines, fragments of recorded history. I remember the day, he said. Not because it was dramatic, it wasn't. That's the part people always get wrong. There was no warning speech, no big moment where everything slowed down. He paused briefly. Just a noise, then another. Then everything started breaking. His voice stayed steady, but there was something underneath it now, something older than the chamber they stood in. They pulled you out fast, he continued, faster than anyone else. I didn't understand it at the time, thought it was luck. Sira's fingers curled slightly at her side, almost imperceptible. It wasn't luck, she said quietly. No, he agreed. Turns out it wasn't. He glanced at her, then back at the space between them, as if the past was somewhere just out of reach, hovering. I looked for you after, he said. At first it was simple. Ask around, check the evacuation routes, see who got moved where. And when you found nothing, Sira said, I assumed you were somewhere else, he said, somewhere safer. A faint, humorless smile touched his expression. Turns out, somewhere safer is a very big place. A quiet shift moved through the chamber as the officials processed what they were hearing, not as a defense, not as an excuse, but as something far less structured. So I kept looking, he said, which in hindsight was either very loyal or very stupid. Both, one of the officers muttered. The human pointed slightly in their direction without looking. I heard that, and I'm choosing to take it as a compliment. Sira ignored the interruption. You spent years searching, she said. On and off, he corrected. Had to survive in between. Eat, sleep, occasionally avoid getting shot. That is generally advisable, she said. Highly recommend it, he replied. A brief pause. But you never stopped, she said. He looked at her again. No, he said. I didn't. The chamber absorbed that in silence. I started hearing things, he continued. Not at first. Not anything useful. Just fragments. Mentions of a Vithari noble with unusual habits. Sira's gaze sharpened slightly. Unusual, he nodded. Apparently you argued with your own advisors. Regularly. A faint ripple moved through the officials, this time edged with something dangerously close to recognition. That is not unusual, one of them said defensively. Of course it isn't, the human said quickly. Completely standard behavior. I'm sure all your leaders do it. They do not, the same official replied. That explains a lot, he murmured. Sierra's expression did not change, but there was something in her eyes now, something that did not belong to the present moment alone. You followed rumors, she said. I followed patterns, he corrected. Rumors are just patterns people haven't confirmed yet. And eventually, she said, those patterns led you here. Eventually, he agreed. He shifted again, this time stepping slightly closer. Not enough to break any unspoken boundaries, but enough to make the space between them feel smaller. I didn't know it was you, he said. Not for sure. Not until I got close enough that your ship started trying to remove me from existence. That is standard procedure, she said. Yeah, I figured that out too. Another pause. But you kept going, she said. He nodded. I told you, he said. I was looking for someone. Sierra held his gaze. And now you have found her, she said. For the first time since the trial began, he hesitated in a way that had nothing to do with uncertainty. Yeah, he said quietly. I guess I did. The chamber did not know what to do with that. Neither, it seemed, did the Queen. The chamber did not return to normal. It tried. You could feel it in the way the systems adjusted. Lights recalibrating, displays reorganizing themselves. Officials subtly shifting back into positions that made sense in a trial. But something fundamental had already broken from its original shape, and no amount of protocol could quite force it back. Sierra turned slightly, just enough to acknowledge the presence of the court again. The charges, she said, her voice steady, controlled, remain valid. There it was. Structure, order, something the chamber could understand. Several officials straightened almost immediately, relief flickering across their expressions. Finally, something familiar. The human nodded once. That sounds about right. One of the guards looked at him as if expecting him to object, or at least attempt to defend himself. He did neither. Sierra continued. Unauthorized entry, hostile engagement with Vathari forces, refusal to comply with interrogation. All technically accurate, he said. Technically? One of the advisors echoed. He glanced at them. I wasn't trying to be hostile. I was just very committed. That is not a distinction our defense systems recognize. They should, he said. It would make things a lot less stressful for everyone. A quiet ripple passed through the chamber again, tension bending but not breaking. Sierra let the exchange pass. The consequence for these actions, she said, is termination. The words settled heavily. This time the chamber accepted it. This was the path they knew. The human exhaled slowly, not surprised, not resisting. Yeah, he said, that tracks. One of the officials glanced at him sharply, clearly unsettled by the absence of fear. Sierra watched him carefully. You do not contest this, she said. He shook his head. I crossed your space, disabled your ships, ignored your warnings. He shrugged slightly. I get it. And yet, she said, you proceeded. I already explained that part. Yes, she said. You did. A pause followed, but it was different now. Not empty, not waiting, balancing. Sierra turned back toward the bench, ascending the steps with the same measured control she had entered with. The display before her reactivated, awaiting the final command. Everything aligned again. Almost. Her hand rose. The chamber stilled completely. This was the moment it had been built for. The final motion. The irreversible decision. The human watched her, not with defiance, not with desperation, but with a kind of quiet acceptance that did not belong in that place. Well, he said softly, at least I got to see you again. The words were simple. They were not strategic. They did not attempt to influence anything, and yet they landed harder than anything else he had said. Sierra's hand stopped, not dramatically, not enough for someone who wasn't watching closely to notice, but it stopped. The chamber did not breathe. She looked at him. Not as a queen now, not entirely. You risked your life, she said, her voice quieter than before, though the system still carried it clearly. For a memory. He tilted his head slightly. It wasn't just a memory. What was it then? He thought about that, actually thought about it for once, instead of answering immediately. A promise, he said, The word lingered. Sierra's expression did not change, but something behind it shifted, something deeper than authority, older than her title. You expect this court, she said, to alter its judgment based on a promise made decades ago. No, he said. I didn't expect anything. Then why come? He smiled faintly, but it wasn't his usual easy expression. It was quieter, more certain. Because I said I would, he replied. A long silence followed. One of the advisors stepped forward again, unable to remain still any longer. Your Majesty, they said carefully, the law is clear. If exceptions are made under these circumstances, Sierra raised her hand slightly. The advisor stopped. Not because they were finished speaking, because they understood they would not be allowed to continue. Sierra's gaze remained on the human. You have changed, she said. He let out a small breath. I was hoping I hadn't changed that much. You have, she said. You are less predictable. He smiled a little. That's one way to put it. And yet, she continued, you are still the same. He shrugged. I try to be consistent. A faint pause. Then unexpectedly, Sierra said, you still talk too much. That caught him off guard. He blinked, then let out a short laugh. That's unfair. I've been very restrained today. Several guards shifted again, clearly unsure how to react to a conversation that had drifted this far from a formal sentencing. Sierra turned her attention briefly to the chamber. They were watching her, all of them, waiting, calculating, expecting. She turned back. Her hand was still raised. The system waited. The chamber waited. The law waited. And for the first time in a very long time, Sierra allowed herself to consider something beyond all of it. Her hand lowered, not in the final motion, but away from it. A break, a pause, a decision not yet made. The chamber reacted immediately. Quiet confusion, subtle shifts, the beginning of questions no one dared ask aloud. The human exhaled slowly, tension leaving him in a way that suggested he had been expecting the worst, even if he hadn't shown it. Okay, he said under his breath. That's new again. Sierra did not look at him. Not yet. The sentence, she said, her voice returning to something steadier, more formal, but still not complete, is not yet delivered. The chamber froze on that. Not yet. It was not an answer. It was not a resolution. It was something far more dangerous. Time. And no one in the chamber was quite sure what she intended to do with it. The chamber did not understand what not yet meant. It was not part of its design. Everything here was built for conclusions, for clean endings and irreversible outcomes. A trial moved forward, not sideways. It resolved, it did not hesitate. And yet now the system lights hovered in a state of waiting, the displays holding their data without advancing, as if even the technology was uncertain whether to proceed or pause. Sierra remained at the bench, her hand lowered, her gaze no longer fixed on the final command. She turned slowly this time, not toward the human, but toward the court. The law, she said, exists to preserve order. The official straightened, relief returning in cautious waves. This was familiar ground again. It defines consequence, she continued. It ensures that actions carry weight. A few heads nodded. And it does not, she added, her voice sharpening just slightly, remove responsibility from those who interpret it. That was less comfortable. Silence followed. The human shifted his stance again, but this time there was no restlessness in it. He was listening carefully now, his usual deflection set aside. Sierra descended from the bench once more, not as a deviation, as a decision. She stopped in front of him again, close enough now that there was no distance left for formality to hide behind. You crossed into my territory, she said. You endangered my people. You forced a military response. All true, he said quietly. You refused to identify yourself. Also true. And yet, she said, her gaze steady, you did not act with intent to harm. He hesitated, then nodded. No. You acted, she continued, with intent to find. The chamber shifted again, but no one interrupted. Sierra turned slightly, addressing both him and the court at once. The charges remain, she said, but the context is no longer incomplete. One of the advisors stepped forward, carefully measured. Your Majesty, context does not negate violation. No, Sira said. It defines it. The advisor stopped. Sira returned her attention to the human. You said you made a promise, she said. I did. You have fulfilled it. He let out a small breath. Yeah. A faint pause. Now you will explain something else, she said. He blinked once. That's a dangerous phrase. You will explain, she continued, why your approach required disabling 2 of my ships. He opened his mouth, paused, then scratched the back of his neck. In my defense, he said, they were very determined to not let me through. They were performing their duty. So was I, he replied. A faint, unmistakable shift passed through Sira's expression again. You consider this duty, she said. I told you I would find you, he said. That sounded like a responsibility at the time. And now? He thought about that for a moment. Now it sounds like something I should have planned better. A few quiet reactions rippled through the chamber, tension bending again, just slightly. Sira studied him. You have changed, she said. Hopefully improved, he replied. You have survived, she said. You have adapted. You have crossed systems and avoided termination repeatedly. I like to stay busy. And yet, she said, you chose the most direct and least survivable path at the end. He gave a small shrug. I was running out of indirect ones. That earned the faintest exhale from one of the guards, quickly suppressed. Sira turned back toward the bench. The system reactivated immediately, sensing resolution. Her hand rose again. This time it did not stop. The sentence, she said, her voice clear, final, is amended. The word landed like a controlled detonation, not rejected, not denied, changed. The chamber reacted. Quiet shock, rapid calculations, the beginning of protests that never fully formed. The charges of hostile engagement are reclassified, she continued, as unauthorized but non-lethal interference. One of the advisors stepped forward again, unable to contain it. Your Majesty, that is accurate, she said without looking at them. The advisor stopped. The charge of refusal to identify is upheld, she added. The human nodded slightly. Fair. And the consequence, she said, is reassigned. Now the chamber leaned in. Even the system seemed to focus. Sira lowered her hand. Service, she said. The word echoed. The human blinked. That's new. You will remain, she said, under supervision. He raised an eyebrow. Supervision sounds ominous. You will assist in repairing the systems you disrupted. That sounds less ominous. You will explain your methods, she continued, in full technical detail. He winced slightly. That sounds extremely ominous. And, she said, her gaze settling on him once more, you will not leave Vithari space without authorization. He considered that. Then he smiled. Not the careless smile from before, not the deflecting one, but something quieter, something steadier. Yeah, he said. I think I can manage that. A long silence followed, but it was different now. Not tension, not uncertainty. Something settled. Sira held his gaze for a moment longer, then turned away, ascending the bench for the final time. The chamber adjusted. The systems aligned. The trial concluded. But something else had begun, something that did not fit into any protocol or structure the Vithari had ever written. The human exhaled slowly, looking around at the room that had nearly ended him and had instead changed direction. Well, he murmured to himself, that went better than expected. One of the guards, still watching him carefully, said, You are not free. He nodded. I noticed. A pause. Then, glancing once more toward the bench, toward the figure who had once been a girl in a place that no longer existed, he added quietly, But I'm not lost anymore.